So, does the Judeo-Christian tradition allow for any heroes? Do we have superheroes in the Judeo-Christian tradition? If it's all this radical self-denial, is there any possibility that Christians can do great things, acts of valor, and maybe even acts of violence in order to defend or advocate to champion the position of other people, right? Are there heroes? Well, certainly Christian teachings emphasize humility, self-denial, a service towards others, but they don't preclude acts of heroism. And in fact, acts of heroism are taking the Christian idea that we act outside of ourselves for something beyond ourselves, our relationship with God, for instance, to an extreme. And so we're actually called to acts of heroism. And those heroic acts are heroic specifically because they are not to benefit ourselves, but to benefit other people. That's what makes them heroic in the first place, as we're doing our radical self-denial or laying down our lives on behalf of others, right? So, holy motivations, the idea, the what's going on in people's minds is what's really important. I think I mentioned before the big distinction between Judaism and Christianity is that the Jews want you to act in the right way, obey all the right rules, right? Particularly the rules that are closer to God. So the 600 laws that we can find in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, right? The Jewish Bible, for instance. Whereas it's the intent that is more important than the actual actions in the Christian world. It's the intent. What is going on in somebody's mind? Is it for any purpose other than the pure goodness or correctness of the actions? If it's for self-aggrandizement to make someone look big or gain more power and gain more money, then that takes away from the pure goodness of the act. And so heroism kind of falls within that category. If we act in a manner that is not good for ourselves, but good for the purposes for which we are taking the action, whether that's the preservation of life or preservation of certain principles or getting rid of those Satans that we talked about in one of our earliest videos in this particular series. Get thee behind me, Satan. Right? Anything that stands between human beings and their relationship with God would be Satan by that definition. Those things can all be heroic acts, and heroic acts certainly call oftentimes for very violent actions, right? Actions that, viewed in isolation and objectively, might appear to be very un-Christian. But in context, understanding the purpose for those actions are very Christian indeed. They're definitely actions on behalf of God. So we talked a couple videos back about the Crusades, for instance. Crusaders who were motivated, at least at the very first, to preserve the Holy Land and get that back from the Muslim hordes that were taking over North Africa at that time, including the holy lands of the Jewish people and Christianity. Since Jews and Christians have a shared or a commonality in certain places and experiences, because Jesus himself was a Jew, of course. So Israel is an important place to Christians as well as Jews. So holy motivations would be reclaiming the holy sites of the Christian tradition and Jewish tradition by virtue of the fact that they are in harmony on certain places in our experience, spreading Christianity and showing penance and gaining salvation, doing things, sacrificing ourselves. The older I get, the more I would appreciate the opportunity to die in a blaze of glory. Not glory for myself, but glory of God, doing the right thing. Something that would help me to redeem all the failings that I've had over my years of existence and make them somehow disappear in the self-sacrifice, ultimate sacrifice that I could give on behalf of God. Right? I know it's a very strange thing to say, but if you're older, like me, right, you'll understand. If you're older still, in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, you'll understand even more exactly what I'm talking about. So penance and salvation, those are good motivations, right? Doing the right thing simply because the right thing is there, even if it's at the cost of our own lives. However, crucial to our thinking about crusaders is that they were distracted by political and economic interests, having lands, right? That would have been a distraction. Political, getting in good with the king so the king could give them rewards and status back in their homelands, whether that's in France or in England or other places. Many knights in the Crusades were offered a chance to escape social and economic restraints of feudal society. In other words, they didn't have to fight against the people that worked for them, serfs on up, or against other lords and knights who would take their land from them. Feudal society wouldn't have to fight with a lance in order to maintain their position. So religious fervor was definitely the motivating factor for people getting involved in the Crusades. But there were other motivations as well. Those other motivations are not the defining characteristics, however. If people got caught up in those economic and political, those power factors, then perhaps those are what defined those particular knights or those warriors during the Crusades. But for those that remained pure in their motivations were good, and the Crusaders were good to that extent. So I'm not ready to discount or demonize Crusaders as others have in the particularly in the past several years. Let's see if there is anything else I want to say. Understand that within all human beings, as men and women of God, we have two selves that are existing within us, our old self and our new self. The new self being that self, that soul, that part of us that wants to live strictly in relationship with God. The fact is, we live in society. We live in a reality outside of ourselves that demands something other than that strict relationship with God. We still have to go to the grocery store and buy groceries, buy food. We still have to pay our bills. We still have to obey local traffic laws so we don't hit kids in school zones with our car, for instance, and stuff like that. The old self is the practical self. And Jesus, I think I mentioned this, recognized this when he held up a coin and he said, whose picture is on this? Right? It's Caesar's. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. We still exist in a world where the Caesar or the state or the society that we live in has certain demands on us. We have to live up to those demands. But we can live beyond those demands as well. We can satisfy those demands so well that it's never a question as to whether we're satisfying those demands. Where the old self, the quote old self, is a major consideration for Christians at least, is that the old self is not the one that is satisfying the demands of the society that we live in necessarily, but is satisfying our selfish demands. And those selfish demands, those self-oriented demands, those come upon us frequently. So we'll end up doing things that are good for ourselves, but not necessarily good for the relationship with God. That's what the old self, the old man, is all about. The old self in us that wants to live for us. And we do those things frequently. It's part of our natural existence. It's part of our lives. We don't need to demand or deny those facts. We just recognize that those things are not the ones that define us. The ones that define us are our relation and the things we do in relationship with God. So getting beyond the old self, even when the old self pulls us back down into our prior godless existence, we can come back again, throwing our arms open wide, saying, God, let me try again. Let me do it right. Please take me back. And God always does. So far, always has, right? In my personal experience. Because I need God more than most. All right, that's probably enough. That's enough to take care of this discussion. That kind of wraps up our discussion on the attack upon Western civilization by moral relativism as well. So we'll move beyond that with the next series of videos. I'll talk to you later.